Praise the Lord, everyone. So we're going to be talking about the story of Mary and Elizabeth and how it relates to various verses on friendship in Proverbs. So our first verse is Proverbs 16:28.
A perverse man sows strife, and a whisper separates chief friends.
So in the story of Mary and Elizabeth, Mary had a lot of people talking about her. There's a lot of gossip about Jesus and why she came back pregnant. You know, she's not married yet, so there's going to be a lot of gossip going around. But in Elizabeth's friendship to her, she never gossips, and she's only happy for what God is doing in her life. So they have a stronger friendship because of this.
Our next passage of scripture is chapter 20, verse 6 from Proverbs. Most men will proclaim each his own goodness, but who can find a faithful man?
Okay, so Elizabeth was so faithful to Mary in that she only proclaimed Mary's goodness. She never is like wanting that admiration for bearing the Christ. Elizabeth is always just happy for her, and she never proclaims her own goodness. And likewise, Mary never proclaims her goodness because she's humbled by God using her.
Proverbs chapter 22, verse 11. He who loves purity of heart and grace on his lips, the king will be his friend.
Yeah, so Elizabeth is found pure enough in heart to be able to be a friend to Mary, who bears the King of Kings.
Thanks for being here today.
Yes, thanks for coming.
So now we're going to be talking about David and Jonathan and how their friendship is like verses talked about in Proverbs.
We'll be reading from Proverbs chapter 12, verse 26. The righteous choose their friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray.
So Jonathan chose David as a friend when David came into the throne room with after he defeated the Philistine giant. And Jonathan recognized David as someone who feared God, and soon after that, David recognized the same about Jonathan. So they chose their friends wisely. David could have chose Saul as a friend, but he recognized that he had a wicked heart. He decided to not go down that path.
Our next passage of scripture is going to be from Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend who sticketh closer than a brother.
So even throughout, while Saul was trying to kill David, Jonathan, he was a great friend to David, and he didn't forsake him even though his father was trying to kill him. They should have been the worst of enemies, but they were the best of friends instead. Throughout everything, they made promises to keep each other's families safe, and they really did stick closer than brothers.
Proverbs chapter 22, verse 24 and 25. Make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul.
So, like I said before, David very well could have been friends with Saul because David was now a military leader, like a general, and he could have had the friendship that a general and a king would have. But instead, he chose not to go, be friends with the wicked man, the angry man, because he knew that he would eventually end up like Saul, jealous and mad all the time, and Saul eventually had his kingdom taken away from him. And David, who did not go down that path, had a very successful kingdom, and he was probably the most loved of all of Israel's kings. So that is a great example of what that verse is saying.
Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17. Iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the accountants of his friend.
So David and Jonathan, they sharpened each other's relationships with God. Both of them, they just really knew that each other feared the Lord, and they just made each other stronger in that. And they made covenants with each other, which strengthened their relationship also. And that verse is, a really good example of how friends are supposed to help each other spiritually and in their actual friendship. That is all.
Thanks for coming to the plant, though. There's plants in the way.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 17. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity.
Now, for Naomi and Ruth, like what this verse is saying about them is that Ruth, no matter what, was stuck with Naomi, despite of her depression and sorrow. And next.
Proverbs chapter 27, verses 5 and 6. Open rebuke is better than secret love. Faithful are the wounds of my friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful.
And kind of what this verse is saying was that Ruth was faithful to Naomi, even though Naomi was hurtful to her, like back to Ruth, because like Naomi told her to stay in Moab and to marry somebody that's from her country, but Ruth didn't listen to that and went with her.
Proverbs chapter 27, verse 9. Ointment and perfume delight the heart, and the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel.
So what this is kind of saying is that it took Naomi a while, but Ruth, kind of in the second part of it, it talks about being like sweet and kind. That's what Ruth was being to Naomi. She was being sweet and kind despite her being depressed and didn't really care and being rude to her. But then once Naomi realized the genuine sweetness of Ruth, she was pulled out of her depression. And that wraps it up.
That's our project. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thanks for being here.